Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tom Van Der Ostnot, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of each and every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website, louisvilleforum.org. And now to our topic today. Our topic and speaker today is Challenges and Opportunities of Education in Louisville and the State, with Interim Kentucky Commissioner of Education, Dr. Wayne Lewis, Jr. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to give a little background on how the current situation today would pertaining to JCPS. In February of 2017, the Kentucky Department of Education announced that it would conduct an audit of JCPS. The results of that audit were released on April 30th, 2018, along with the announcement that the department would take over JCPS. In Kentucky, there are 173 school districts consisting of 1,220 public schools with 42,146 teachers instructing 656,588 students. The last total budget of the department was $5.08 billion from all sources. Since the passage of CARA in 1984, 3 school districts have been taken over by the department: Floyd and Whitley counties in 1989, Breathitt County in 2012, and Menifee County in 2015. Those school districts have respectively 5,655, 1,869, and 1,032 students each, for a total number of 8,556 students. JCPS is the latest school district to be taken over by the department. JCPS is the largest school district in Kentucky and the 28th largest school system in the United States, with 6,600 teachers, 172 schools, and 100,900 students. For a comparable number of students, one would have to combine the next 5 biggest school districts in Kentucky, those of Fayette, Boone, Warren, Hardin, and Kenton counties. And now, to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Wayne Lewis, Jr. Dr. Lewis was named by the Kentucky Board of Education on April 17, 2018, as the Interim Commissioner of Education. Dr. Lewis is a University of Kentucky professor and most recently served as the Executive Director of Educational Programs with the Kentucky Cabinet for Education and Workforce Development. He has taken a leave of absence from UK and resigned his position with the Cabinet to serve as the Interim Commissioner. Dr. Lewis has more than 15 years of experience in public education, serving professionally in public school districts, higher education institutions, and state government. He has served as an advisor to the Kentucky Board of Education, the Education and Workforce Secretary's designee on Kentucky's Early Childhood Advisory Council, and chair of Kentucky's Charter Schools Advisory Council. His research, writing, and teaching encompass the areas of education policy and politics, human capital and human resources management, and education organizations. Dr. Lewis is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and has called Kentucky his home since 2009. He is married to an educator and has a young daughter. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Wayne Lewis.
First of all, I thank you for that introduction. I thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I have a few prepared remarks, but more than anything this afternoon, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to have some dialogue with you, for you to ask some questions, to hear from you, and for you to have the opportunity to hear from me as well. In terms of my background, I think many of you probably have heard more about my background and where I came from than you care to know. And so I will not recount that. What I will share with you by way of introduction is 3 students that I've had over the course of my career. I believe I've learned as much or more from my students over the course of my career than I've learned from any formal education that I've received. Those of you who are educators, I'm pretty sure you can relate to what I'm saying. So the first student I'll tell you about, his name's Brandon. I had Brandon very early. In fact, I believe I had Brandon in my very first semester of teaching. Brandon was a drug dealer. He would walk around with rolls of cash bigger than anything I'd ever seen in my life. Everyone around the school knew he was a drug dealer. He was a big man at school, big man in the community, and he found his way into my self-contained emotional behavior disordered mathematics course at Booker T. Washington High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. Brandon seldom paid attention to anything that I had to say in the classroom. He seldom participated in activities that I was facilitating. And you can imagine as a first semester teacher, that was pretty disconcerting for me. I really didn't know how to reach him. But I remember very vividly one day I walked to the back window in the classroom where Brandon was standing. I was teaching and having class, and most of the class was participating. Brandon was at the back window, and so eventually I made my way to the back window. And before I could say anything to Brandon, he said to me, he said, "Mr. Lewis, you act like we're not in the middle of the project." And it took me a while to really wrap my head around what Brandon was saying to me. But eventually I did. Quite honestly, it took me a few years to really wrap my head around what he was saying. He was saying that our school was in the middle of the Calliope Project in New Orleans, one of the most dangerous housing developments in the city, one of the most dangerous housing developments in the country. It was routine for at least one person to lose their life in that housing development during that time. And he was saying that I was approaching teaching, I was approaching my work in that classroom in such a manner that I was not giving enough respect to the fact that young people were losing their lives every day in their community. That as they walked out of the doors at the end of the school day, their reality was so much different than the middle class norm that as teachers, to be honest, we're prepared to deal with. The reality that he came to my classroom in high school not having been prepared to deal with high school curriculum, with high school coursework. And I was approaching my work, he was right, by the way, I was approaching my work such that I believed that all Brandon had to do was pay attention to what it was I was teaching, and things in his life were gonna be just fine, and I was wrong. So the first lesson that I'm sharing with you that shapes who I am as a person, as an educator, is the lesson that Brandon helped to teach me, and that is that context matters tremendously. While there are lots of challenges that we face across educational contexts, whether it's from rural, isolated rural, to urban, to suburban, to poor, to affluent, there are lots of things that are constant in terms of challenges, in terms of strategies, and the way that we reach kids, but context matters tremendously. And at that point in my career, I wasn't prepared to give enough weight to the reality that his context, that my students' context factored tremendously in how they learned and what we could accomplish in the classroom. The second student I'll introduce you to, I met a little bit later, different lesson, and his name was Burnell. And Burnell was one of those kids that I had struggled with mightily. I mean, it was some days were better than others, but most days were not great. We had some challenges with our relationship. I think in addition to the challenges Burnell faced with academic, with content and some of his behavior challenges, I think it was one of those situations as well where personality-wise, sometimes we just weren't a great mesh. Educators will understand and can attest to the fact that sometimes that happens in the classroom. Here's the big lesson Burnell taught me. He actually taught me a few, but this is the one I want to share with you. I was really hard on Burnell because I saw the potential in him, and I would not let up on him. I saw his potential, and I knew if we could just keep pushing him, if we could keep surrounding him with support, that eventually he would get to the place where Burnell could thrive academically and pursue the things that we knew he wanted to do with his life. One day, though, Burnell had a difficult day, and I think he reached an emotional kind of breaking point. And in a conversation we had standing in the corner of the class, at the end of class, the rest of the students had left, Burnell said something to me that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He said, because I had him in a mathematics resource class at the middle school level, and he said, I don't know why you on me so hard. You know black people can't do math. 7th grade student. But that statement, what Burnell said to me, he meant. He showed me that he believed beyond the shadow of a doubt that black folks were incapable of doing mathematics at the level as other people. I recognized pretty soon in that instance that it didn't matter how much we could provide in terms of instructional strategies and resources for Burnell and students like him if we couldn't also change his mindset and help to get him to the place where he realized the truth, just that African Americans can do absolutely anything that anyone else can do. But that wasn't his belief at that point. And he's just the student who'd reached that emotional point that day who said it to me. He's not the only kid in that school or that district or this country who believed that. That was the second lesson that I'll share with you. And the third one is a brief one. This is a student by the name of Robert. And I had more difficulty with connecting and reaching and really having a positive academic impact on Robert's trajectory than any other student I had faced. I had him at the high school level. It was, again, emotional behavior disorder, self-contained class. And Robert would do absolutely nothing for me. I mean, nothing. I couldn't get him to sit down in the seat, much less do something when he got there. And to cut to the chase, the lesson that I learned and continue to learn from Robert and other Roberts that I've had over the course of my career is that students arrive in teachers' classrooms or in schools oftentimes having been failed by our system for many years. I had Robert in high school. Robert couldn't read. I'm not talking about couldn't read well. He could not read. He couldn't subtract. Couldn't multiply. I'm talking about very, very basic skills. Not only do we have to recognize that kids sometimes get to different levels in schools and to classrooms without having received the type of attention and support that they need to be successful, but as well, that me, first of all, as an instructor, as his teacher, I lacked the capacity to be able to reach him and be effective with him in that classroom at that time. That's important for me now, even at the policy level, because I recognize not only have we sometimes failed kids that continue to get through the system, but we have to recognize as well that sometimes we lack the capacity to reach kids in the way that they need to be reached. It is not always the kid's fault. It's not always the parent's fault. Sometimes it is that we have not gotten to the place in our understanding or our development as educators, as administrators, as policymakers, we have not yet reached the place where we have the cure or the right strategy to reach certain kids. It doesn't mean that the kids can't be reached. It just means we haven't figured it out yet. And that lesson was really important for me as well. I give you those lessons because you've heard all the other stuff about me. You know who my mama was, my daddy. You know I played the saxophone. You know my undergraduate. Y'all know stuff about me that I've forgotten. But I think it's important that you hear those lessons from me that students have given me, because they do shape who I am. Those aren't the only lessons I've learned, but those are three really, really important. Those impact the way I approach my work. So I think that gives you a little bit more of an eye into me. Let me talk really briefly about some policy priorities that I have in this role, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. The first one that we are engaged in really deeply at the moment is taking a fresh look at Kentucky's high school graduation requirements. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. It is past time that we take a look at what it means to earn a Kentucky high school diploma. Because here's the current reality. We issue high school diplomas, unfortunately, to kids who we have not taught to read. We issue high school diplomas, unfortunately, to kids we have not taught to do basic mathematics, and that's not okay. It's unethical. I would argue it's immoral. It ought to be criminal. The other thing I'd say in terms of the reason why I think it's so imperative that we tackle this right now, we have a metric in Kentucky that we use called college and career readiness. You guys are probably familiar with that. Dick Ennis at the Bluegrass Institute has called this college and career readiness rate essentially the effective high school graduation rate. I think it makes a lot of sense. What it means is these are the students who, by our measure, we believe are prepared to go on to college, be it a 2-year institution, 4-year institution, technical school, or into the workforce with a skill. So not just exit and go on into a job where they make minimum wage, but exit and go on into a job where they can make a wage that's sufficient for taking care of themselves. College and career readiness. The last estimate we have across the state in terms of the percentage of kids who graduate high school who are college and career ready, college or career ready, that is, let me be clear, is about 60%. 60% of the students who we issued high school diplomas to this semester, we deemed to be ready for college or a career. Let's take the reverse of that. That means 40% of the kids that we handed high school diplomas to this year across the Commonwealth, we deemed to be ready for neither college nor a career. 40%. Which essentially means that the minimum standards for high school graduation in the Commonwealth aren't much more than a certificate of attendance. Means kids have attended school for 4 years. So we're taking a fresh look at this. We want to understand what are those basic foundational things that any student graduating high school in Kentucky, whether it's in Jefferson County or Pikeville Independent, what are those very basic things that any student who hands an employer that diploma, hands a post-secondary institution a diploma, what should they know that that means? Because right now, it doesn't really mean anything other than the kid attended high school long enough to get the diploma. The second one we have to tackle is the achievement gap, or rather achievement gaps. There's more than one, right? We're talking about socioeconomic achievement gaps, racial and ethnic achievement gaps between children with disabilities and children who do not have disabilities. In many cases, achievement gaps in our state haven't just held constant, they have widened. The disparity between the performance of the haves and the have-nots in Kentucky is getting worse. Kids who have traditionally performed well are performing even better. And kids who have traditionally been underserved or have underperformed, their performance is staying about the same or declining. which makes that gap even wider. It's unconscionable. We cannot continue to be okay issuing or doing what we do in terms of education and be okay with the such disparate outcomes. The third one is the skills gap. You're going to hear me talk a lot about that. It's recognition of the fact that across the Commonwealth, we've got 150 to 200,000 open jobs, many of them really good paying jobs, for which the employers simply cannot find people to fill those jobs because we do not have the Kentuckians with the skills necessary to take them. Now, this is not just a K-12 education problem. All right, this is a Kentucky problem, but K-12 education, there's a tremendous role for us to play in our schools in terms of getting kids skilled up so that they can take jobs that are here, and then attracting even more jobs to the Commonwealth. And then the last one is expanding the high-quality public school options that are available to our kids. Now, let me be clear here. When I talk about options, when I talk about choice, most folks' mind immediately goes to public charter schools, right? Many of you know that I am an advocate for high-quality public charter schools, and that is simply because high-quality public charter schools have been shown to be effective, particularly in urban communities, especially with low-income children of color. And so it would be irrational for me to say I'm not interested in any tool that research shows has been effective with the very population of students that we have struggled with the most. With that said, high-quality public charter schools is a tool. It is not the tool, it's a tool. When I say one of my policy priorities is expanding the high-quality public school options available to kids, what I'm talking about first and foremost is the options available to kids in our traditional public school districts. Because the vast majority of kids across this Commonwealth will continue to be educated in traditional public school districts. When you look at the options or the programs of choice, the schools of choice that are available to our parents, not just in Louisville, but across the Commonwealth, these high-quality programs, you know very well, these programs are oversubscribed. They have waiting lists that are a mile long, parents waiting to be able to get their kids in those programs. We have not met the demand that parents have for the types of options, the differentiated types of choices that they are demanding for their kids. To be frank, the choices that kids need in order to be able to meet the demands of post-secondary education and the 21st century economy. And so we have to expand the number of seats, the number of options, the types of schools, the types of programs that we offer to kids, and some of those should come through public charter schools. Most of those have to come through traditional public schools, through our traditional public school districts. At KDE, we operate 53 area technology centers. Many of the programs of choice that I'm talking about are going to have to come through our area technology centers where we're skilling folks up, particularly in our top 5 high-demand sectors, to get kids ready for the jobs of today and tomorrow. That's where I'll stop. So you have a little bit better idea of who I am, of what I believe, and the things that I want to tackle in this role. With that, I'm happy to answer some questions.
And we have many of them, Dr. Lewis, so thank you for taking them. We're back here in this corner, by the way, in case you're looking for us. And we have other Louisville Forum board members who will be coming throughout today's luncheon to be able to collect any other questions you have as we continue here for the next half hour or so. We have 2 questions, Dr. Lewis, just to set up maybe some facts that our members are interested in. First the achievement gap, and then the history of taking over school districts in Kentucky. So the first question, almost every day we read in the Courier-Journal about the achievement gap in JCPS schools. Please explain how large the achievement gap is. And secondly, and I can repeat that if you like in a moment, how many districts and schools has the state of Kentucky taken over? How many schools and districts are still under the state of Kentucky control? And what is the shortest length that the state retain control a school or district. But the first question, again, is to define the achievement gap in JCPS.
All right, and I'm going to need your help with making sure
Yep.
that I hit all of those. Let's
Sure.
talk about the achievement gap, first of all. The achievement gap across the Commonwealth and in Jefferson County Public Schools is extraordinary. It differs in terms of size depending on what the specific groups of students are that you're talking about. So whether you're comparing the performance of white kids to black kids, Latino kids to white kids, economically disadvantaged kids to non-economically disadvantaged. It differs as well from the elementary to the middle to the high school level. At the biggest I've seen in terms of the widest, you're talking about middle school mathematics. You could be as much for the difference between white kids and black kids as 40 points on achievement scores and on K-Prep scores. There's a lot of nuances to that question. One of the things that I've heard a lot over the last couple of weeks with respect to the achievement gap, the size of the achievement gap in Jefferson County, the size of the achievement gap in Kentucky, and people wanting to compare and say, well, is the achievement gap in Jefferson County, significantly different than what the achievement gap is across the Commonwealth? It's not significantly different in terms of the size and the performance of white kids and African American kids. One of the areas in particular where I think is a major area for growth in Jefferson County, in addition to everything that we see across the state with achievement gaps, is the performance of kids with disabilities. Not just their performance on standardized exams, but their post-school outcomes. As kids leave high school and they transition into something else, wanting to see our kids with disabilities transition into something positive, whether that's into a post-secondary program or into work.
And the follow-up again, I'll ask you these in order. How's that? How many
Yes, sir.
districts and schools has the state of Kentucky taken over?
I believe it's been 3. There are currently 2 that are in state management. Those are Breathitt County and Menifee County.
Which answers the second question, is how many are still under state control? What is the shortest length that the state retained control over a school or a district, do you know?
That I'm not sure of.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I'm Iris Wilbur, a Louisville Forum board member.
Hi, Iris.
Question for you. How do we educate children who are behind the poverty line and who are challenged with mental illness and disabilities? And how do we pay for it?
That's a question, to be honest, I can't answer in a couple minutes, nor can I answer alone. I don't have the answer. There's probably not an answer to how we educate kids with all the characteristics that you've identified, right? When we talk about the underperformance of kids, especially really hard to reach kids, really tough populations of kids, there are complex reasons as to why we got to the place we did with achievement. And it's going to take really complex solutions to address those issues. So I'm sorry, I don't have a really good answer in terms of how we meet the needs of those kids succinctly.
And I should have introduced myself. I'm Joe Arnold, also a Louisville Forum board member.
Thank you, sir.
Where does the process go from here regarding JCPS? How does a takeover work?
Yeah. So, really great question. I'm really glad you asked. Let me clarify a few things from our conversation thus far. The Kentucky Department of Education has not taken over Jefferson County Public Schools. The only thing that has happened as a result of the audit, and let's be clear, the management audit began in 2017 as a result of the findings of the management review. So the management review, first of all, identified 30-plus deficiencies. As a result of those deficiencies, former Commissioner Pruitt made the decision to proceed with the management audit, which I think has taken about 14 months. At the end of that audit on August 30th, I issued my recommendation to the Kentucky Board of Education that Jefferson County Public Schools become a state-managed district. That recommendation is before the State Board of Education. The Jefferson County Public Schools had a 30-day period to either decide to participate in a hearing where they could challenge my recommendation, or they could have elected to not participate in a hearing and allow my recommendation to go before the state board without a hearing. They decided to participate in that hearing, I believe on May 30th. And so we are now in preparation and plans for that hearing. The state board ultimately will hear both sides and will make a determination as to whether or not Jefferson County becomes a state-managed district or not. In that hearing, I will make the case that it is the only route to ensure that kids are adequately kept safe, and that we can ensure that the serious deficiencies identified in that audit are addressed. My guess is Jefferson County Public Schools will make the case that it is not. The state board will make the determination. There's been one other thing about that process that has been subject to some conversation that I want to bring some clarity to. There's been a lot of folks who have said, well, what's the plan? We want to know what the plan is going forward, right? And we'll look at your plan and determine whether or not this is what we should do. Well, that does not align with the law. And you guys can take a look at the law. The law governs the process. The law governed everything that we've done from the management review, what areas were looked at, from the management audit, what things were looked at. We're at the process now where the state board is to make a determination, and then the regulation tells us that following the declaration of a district as state-managed or state assistance, then, and actually the language of the regulation says the district is to develop an improvement plan to address those deficiencies. The plan is not a part of the conversation now. The plan is not to be developed at this point. The plan, according to law, is to be developed after a determination has made by the State Board of Education, and I am going to follow the law.
What are your thoughts on the current JCPS collective bargaining agreement and the process moving forward?
Obviously, Jefferson County Public Schools, as I've just clarified, is not a state-managed district. They have every right to move forward in negotiating the contract in the way that they see fit. The only thing I can say about the contract as a third-party observer at this point is that my hope is that as they move forward in negotiating that contract, that they ensure that that contract is negotiated in such a way that it puts children first. And that anything that is in that contract or that has been a part of that contract, that has been a barrier to improving student learning, has been a barrier to ensuring that staff are adequately trained, provided professional development, that has been a barrier to ensuring that the right teachers and the right staff are attracted to the highest need schools, that you can attract and retain really high quality folks at those schools, and ideally even incentivize teachers going to those places. I hope those are things that are front and center as they negotiate that contract, right? That's not to say that I don't believe things like teacher salary, teacher working conditions are not incredibly important, because they are incredibly important. And again, I think Jefferson County Teachers Association has every right to negotiate on those things. But the school business is a kid business first and foremost. And so anything that has been a part of that agreement that has been a barrier should be removed.
What can the state do that the current JCPS cannot do?
I'm not sure I understand.
And for the sake of clarity, we collate the questions and we try to represent, and actually we read them verbatim. So I'm just asking, I guess what the question or my interpretation would be is, why would you take it over? If the state's taking it over or managing it, what could the state do that the current JCPS board is not allowed to do? Oh. What parameters, or is it something different as far as your control or your powers?
So part of that question gets to what our plan would be moving forward, and so I won't get into that. If the state board declares the district as state managed, we would work with the district to develop what that plan would be.
We have 130 languages in JCPS, many immigrants and refugees. Explain strategies you have to provide culturally appropriate teaching and support for them if this system is under state management.
Again, that's a question that would speak to a plan that would have to be developed, and I will not speak to that.
What other district takeovers nationally would you point to as successful models? And what specifically do you plan to implement as part of your proposed takeover of JCPS?
Again, I hate for us to have to go question through question, but I will say to you guys, I will not be speaking to a plan. I'm following the law in terms of what the law says that process is. Again, I would point you as well, for folks who maybe are unfamiliar with the process. I expect that a lot of us are unfamiliar with the process. This is the same process that has been used in every other instance where a commissioner has made the recommendation for state management. It is the process that is enshrined in regulation. And so lawmakers have every right to change the law, but as the law is today, that is what we will follow.
The first part of that question was any other examples of other takeovers or state managements that you would point to as an example?
There's none that I would point to and say that it would be an example or a model that we would use.
Yeah, I'm just trying to sift through some of these. Dr. Lewis, you went over your outlook on charter schools and the potential here in Kentucky. This question is really simple, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more. Could charter schools replace traditional public schools?
First, I'll deal with both at the same time. One, charter schools should not replace traditional public schools. Charter schools are something different. I believe they exist and should exist as a tool that's a part of the public education system, but they are not traditional public schools and should not replace traditional public schools. In terms of could, the answer to that is no as well. Kentucky statute is actually clear about that. Public charter schools, according to Kentucky law, must be schools of choice. Means you cannot, according to Kentucky law, assign kids to attend public charter schools. As you all know, we have to have schools to assign kids to. In fact, in some of our districts, the public charter schools couldn't be a possibility, at least conversion public charter schools couldn't be a possibility, because there are no other seats, there are no other places where they could assign kids. That part of the statute prevents us from ever getting to a place where public charter schools could replace traditional public schools, because traditional public schools don't have to be schools of choice. Public charter schools do.
Next questions, and I'm going to ask a two-parter again. First, since Governor Bevin and Hal Heiner came to office with a shared agenda, charter schools, can you assure us that your decisions are independent of political pressure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll say this. For anyone who actually decides to take a look at the audit, you read my letter and you read the findings of the audit, it becomes very clear that the deficiencies identified in that audit cannot be fixed by public charter schools. So I've heard a lot of conversation about, this is just a ploy, this is just a gimmick to get public charter schools in. Let me be clear. The standard for even getting to a place where a management review is necessary is a very low standard. It is difficult, it is extremely difficult to get to the place where a management review is even warranted. As a result of that management review, 30 deficiencies were identified. The decision then was to go into a management audit. It's even more difficult to qualify to go into a management audit. And then when you're talking about the evidence necessary to make the case that a district becomes state managed, it's incredible. So the fact that we're even having this conversation in any district in Kentucky should give us pause. It means that there's been enough evidence, there have been enough deficiencies found in the district to go through several layers which the vast majority of districts in this Commonwealth will never have to see, right? This is not about charter schools. This is about our children. The last thing I'll say on this question, because I think this is a really important question, really important area. You know, I've heard a lot of commentary and a lot of, I think, really important discussion around my recommendation. I will note that most of the pushback that I've heard around my recommendation has been around local control. And I will tell you, I think local control is important. Local control is really important. I've not heard much conversation around refuting the extremely serious deficiencies identified in that audit. And that is what the State Board of Education will be tasked with making a determination based on. Has there been a pattern, not an instance or two, but a pattern? We're talking about over a long period of time, a pattern of ineffectiveness and inefficiency in areas laid out in the law. Charter schools will not enter this conversation. It has nothing to do with this conversation. Am I an advocate for high-quality public charter schools? Yes, I've said that. Will charter schools begin to address the deficiencies that got Jefferson County Public Schools into this? Absolutely not.
You brought up 2 points, actually, that were part of the questions I had queued up. One was the person said you hadn't mentioned local control, but you just did, as far as your feelings on that. But the second one, the follow-up for the question I asked a moment ago, was given the ineffectiveness of our state government, who in Frankfort is as qualified to govern JCPS as our legally elected JCPS board?
I won't respond to that. I'll say another word about local control. You know, because I've thought about this quite a bit, especially over the last couple months. You know, even more fundamental for me, we're thinking about parents and kids, even more fundamental for me than this idea of local governance and local control is the relationship and the rights of parents with respect to their children. Right? So when I think about the relationship between my wife and I and our daughter, the thought of anyone or anybody intruding or stepping in on that relationship gives me great pause, right? But our law provides that given particular circumstances, given certain things that are found to put my daughter in danger, as important as that relationship is between me, my wife, and my daughter, the state has an obligation to step in sometimes to protect my daughter. Now, I see the relationship between parents and children as being even more critical, even more central, more foundational than that of local governance, but even that, and I wouldn't argue that needs to be changed. In instances where my daughter is found to be in danger because of a pattern of inefficiency, ineffectiveness, that I've put her in harm's way or that I've hurt her, then even that relationship, the law allows for the state to step in to protect my daughter sometimes from me. And I'm okay with that. In that same respect, again, it is incredibly difficult to even get to the place where we're having a conversation about whether state assistance or state management is necessary. There have been years and many levels that have gone into this. So by the time we get to that conversation, regardless of where you are on this issue, what we really should be talking about as people who love kids, and you'll hear me say all the time, I love kids first. I love adults too in our school systems, but kids always will come first for me. But what we really should be talking about is the findings of those audits, of that audit, and the things that we see across this system that are happening to our children that put our children in danger.
What is your opinion on JCPS giving up the Head Start program?
You know, I've made my opinion on that really pretty clear. I think it's incredibly unfortunate. You know, it's incredibly unfortunate. Whether it is the district making the decision ahead of time to let the grant go, or if they had decided to keep the grant and you get to the place where the federal government had decided to proceed with termination hearings on the grant, either scenario is really unfortunate. $15 million to support a program for the most vulnerable children in our community, vulnerable in terms of their age, vulnerable in terms of their income. Those of you who are unfamiliar with Head Start are not as familiar. I mean, this is a program for very low-income students. So that's really, I don't know, it's really disappointing. But even more disappointing than the fact that the district decided to give up that $15 million and that they're going to take money from somewhere else to fund it are the findings. Even more disappointing are the fact that we have children in the system who are being abused. And let me be clear, abused is not euphemism for something else. This isn't funny or cute language that we're using. We're talking about children who've been struck, children who've been grabbed, children who've been thrown on the ground, children who've been talked to in a manner that I would not permit any adult to talk to my child. And I think that we have to get to the place as a community where regardless of the children we're talking about, regardless of their income level, regardless of their disability status, regardless of their race and ethnicity, we have to get to the place where we look at the mistreatment of children and see them all as if they're our children. And ask ourselves the question, would I respond different if it were my kid that was in that report? Would I respond different if it was potentially my kid that got dumped out of a cot? Or my 2-year-old that somebody grabbed by the arm and said, you don't know who you're messing with? Or my kid that had been continually mistreated and no adult had been held accountable? Those are the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves, because many times, I'll be honest with you, this is not just in Louisville or in Kentucky, it's across the country. Sometimes we get comfortable with knowing that children are mistreated, neglected, or abused because in our heads, even if it's not conscious, subconsciously in our heads we say, well, it couldn't be my kid. The likelihood that it would have been my kid that was getting treated like that, it's really slim. So even if we don't articulate it, I'm telling you, sometimes it is the thinking that if it's not okay, it's not quite as bad, or it's not quite as urgent, because it couldn't be, in my case, it couldn't be Whitley.
One follow-up question. Do you think JCPS has been transparent about the scandal that is around Head Start?
To be honest, I'm probably not equipped to answer that question. I really couldn't give a good answer. I'm not sure.
What changes would you hope to leave behind in JCPS after state intervention is no longer needed?
Well, first of all, my hope is that state intervention would not be needed for long at all. And I made that very clear in the letter that I wrote to the State Board of Education and to JCPS. You know, in the letter, at the end of the letter, I laid out what I'd hoped would be a plan that we could approach collaboratively, in which I said that if the district could implement the improvement plan as the law requires, implement that plan with fidelity over the next academic year, that I would be happy to make the recommendation at the end of this next academic year that the state be declared state-assisted. And I continue to have that hope that we could get to that place. In terms of what I would hope to leave behind after exiting state management is a change of culture in the district. a change in the way we think about kids, a change in the way specifically we think about our most vulnerable children, that we treat our most vulnerable children and our children who have the greatest need with the same respect and the same care that we treat children who come from more privileged backgrounds. Because that is not what I see today.
A questioner's prerogative as a follow-up on that. Do you think JCPS is incapable of that change without state intervention?
Absolutely. If I did not believe that, I would not have made the recommendation for state management.
This question reads, what room is there for a negotiated settlement and when? And I believe it's in reference to after the State Board of Education makes their ruling, is there an opportunity for the school district to come in and work out a deal?
Well, I would say there's always room for conversation. There's room for conversation today. I've never turned off my phone or turned off my email to Jefferson County Public Schools, and I mean, this doesn't make it to the media, but just so that you know, there's always continued conversation between JCPS and the Kentucky Department of Education. As you probably know, we have quite a few resources in the district now, between focus schools, priority schools, between some of the improvement plans that former Commissioner Pruitt put in place. There's always room for conversation, and I always welcome conversation.
I believe we have time for one more question. This is certainly coming from a parent, apparently. The hallmark of JCPS is choice. The questioner writes, I chose to go to manual. We chose the elementary school for our children. Where did you get the data that says our community members aren't happy with those choices? Most importantly, what do you plan to do with kids who don't choose where they go to school, and how do you check more parents choosers?
Again, I will not speak to a plan for what we would do if the district were declared state managed, because that does not align with what the law calls for me to do.
There's one part of that question perhaps you can address. Where did you get the data that says our community members aren't happy with their choices? Is there a source for data about experience here?
Well, I don't think we polled the community to ask specifically about their happiness with choices. I think perhaps what they're referencing comes from the audit, in that one of the findings of the audit is the current student assignment plan leads to some really significant inequities in the system.
Is there anything we did not ask you that you wanted to address before we end today's luncheon?
I believe we've been able to cover just about everything. If somebody else has one more question, though, I'm more than happy to take it.
Sorry, we have a specific time. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for coming here today. I want to thank you for coming and agreeing to speak to everybody. On behalf of the Louisville Forum, I'd like to present you, I should have unwrapped this beforehand. I forgot about that. Present you with a Louisville Forum Mint Julep Cup. On behalf of that, thank you for coming to the forum. Thank you, sir. I want to thank all of our guests who came today. Please consider membership. Our next program will be on July the 11th. The program will involve home incarceration release for people accused of violent crimes. We'll have a 4-person panel that will be up on our website, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 days. And please sign up early and often. As you can see, it's been a crowded summer. Thank you all for attending the Louisville Forum. And remember, be nice to people. Have a nice day.